My new wife and the man she called her son tried to have me declared mentally incapacitated. 5 days before the hearing, I learned neither of them was who they claimed to be. My name is Walter Reynolds. I'm 71 years old, a retired structural engineer from Scottsdale, Arizona. My wife Carol died of a stroke in 2019 after 38 years of marriage. I thought the rest of my life would be quiet golf mornings, dinners alone, and Sunday phone calls with the grandchildren. Then I met Diane Coleman at the Desert Willow Country Club, and I let myself believe in second chances. What Diane and Kyle did to me almost cost me my freedom, my house, and my mind. It was April 2022. I was having lunch on the club patio when a woman in a cream-colored blazer asked if the empty chair across from me was taken. She introduced herself as Diane, recently widowed, new to Scottsdale from Denver. She had soft gray eyes and a laugh that made the whole patio feel warmer. We talked for 2 hours about grief, about children who had moved away, about how quiet a big house becomes. My daughter Karen lives in Seattle with her own family, and my son Bradley is in Chicago, buried in his career, calling maybe once a month if I was lucky. Diane understood loneliness in a way that felt like relief after 3 years of eating dinner alone at a table built for 6. She called me the next morning, then again 2 days later, just to check how I was doing, and I found myself waiting by the phone like a teenager. Within 6 weeks, she was cooking dinner in my kitchen twice a week, humming old Frank Sinatra songs while she chopped vegetables, filling a silence that had sat in that house since Carol passed. Within 4 months, she had moved into my house on Cactus Wren Lane, her boxes stacked neatly in the guest room closet, though most of them stayed sealed for months, like she hadn't fully decided to unpack her old life. Within a year, we were married at a small ceremony by the pool. A local officiant performed the service, and Frank Delgado, a notary Diane trusted from her late husband's estate, served as one of our 2 witnesses. At the time, I didn't think twice about him. Diane told me she had a grown son named Kyle, who came around often, always cheerful, always calling me Pop, a little too quickly for my comfort, clapping me on the shoulder like we'd known each other for years instead of months. I told myself I was being a suspicious old man. Diane managed our finances so I wouldn't have to worry, she said, taking over the checkbook, the online banking passwords, even scheduling my cardiologist appointments, my dentist, my eye exams. It felt like being cared for. I didn't realize it was something closer to being cataloged. I didn't know it then, but every password I handed her and every appointment she scheduled was quietly becoming part of a case against me. Small things nagged at me anyway. A folder in her nightstand labeled with initials that weren't hers. A phone call she took out on the back patio one evening, voice low, saying, "He still doesn't suspect anything. Just stay patient." When I asked her about it later over dinner, she smiled without missing a beat and said it was about a surprise anniversary trip to Sedona. I chose to believe her, because the alternative meant admitting I'd let a stranger into every corner of my life in under a year. The first real crack came in November 2023. I noticed $6,000 missing from our joint account, transferred to something called Coleman Family Holdings, LLC. When I asked Diane about it, her expression went cold for just a second before it softened again. "Kyle needed help with his business," she said. "You know how hard it's been for him since the divorce." I let it go, afraid of being alone again. Have you ever ignored a warning sign because the alternative felt worse than the lie? By February 2024, things escalated fast. Diane started telling our neighbors I'd been, having confused moments, dropping the comment casually at the mailbox and the community pool. She mentioned it to my own doctor during a routine visit, sitting right beside me, describing episodes of forgetfulness that had never happened. I felt the ground shifting under me but couldn't prove a single thing. Every complaint I raised at home was met with a gentle, patient tone, the kind you'd use on a confused child, which somehow made me doubt myself even more than if she'd simply yelled. Then one afternoon in early March, I found a business card in Kyle's jacket, left on a kitchen chair. It read, "Kyle Voss, Senior Care Consultant, Sunrise Guardianship Services, with an office address in Tempe." I'd never heard either of them mentioned in 18 months. Not Kyle Coleman. Voss. I stood in my own kitchen holding that card, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it into the sink, because nothing about that name made sense to me yet. And some instinct, older than logic, told me not to ask Diane about it directly this time. I called my daughter Karen that night and told her everything. She flew in from Seattle 2 days later without telling Diane, and she brought someone with her, a private investigator named Rosa Alvarez, whom she'd hired the moment I mentioned the missing money. What Rosa found over the next 3 weeks unraveled everything I thought I knew about my own marriage. Diane Coleman was not a widow from Denver. Rosa could find no credible record of a Diane Coleman matching her story before 2021. Her real name was Patricia Voss, and Kyle wasn't her son at all, he was her nephew. Worse than that, Rosa confirmed with documentation that I wasn't their first target. Twice before, in fact. Once in Prescott in 2017, targeting a widower named Harold Whitfield, 79 years old, who died alone in an assisted living facility 11 months after Patricia disappeared with his savings. And once in Tucson in 2020, targeting a man named Gerald Fitch, who ended up in a memory care facility after a fraudulent medical report Kyle had arranged. His house sold out from under him through a forged power of attorney, notarized within the same small network Frank Delgado belonged to. The initials on that folder in Diane's nightstand suddenly made sense. HW and GF, Harold Whitfield, and Gerald Fitch. The clue had been sitting in my own bedroom the whole time. Believe me when I tell you, discovering this felt like the floor of my life caving in beneath me. She's here, right now, in my house, sleeping in my bed, sitting beside me at Carol's memorial bench in the backyard garden crying real tears, or tears that looked real enough to fool a structural engineer who spent 40 years learning how to spot a hairline crack before it became a collapse. And she's already filed paperwork with the Maricopa County Court, requesting guardianship and conservatorship over me, claiming I was no longer capable of managing either my personal decisions or my finances. Backed by a confidential medical evaluation from a doctor Kyle had paid off, a doctor already under investigation after similar complaints from 2 other families. But Rosa also found something worse. The court file contained a proof of service claiming I'd been personally served with a petition weeks earlier, even though I had never seen a single page of it. Karen and Bradley were listed with outdated addresses, so neither of them had been notified. Patricia had also redirected my bank statements and other mail to a post office box she controlled for months. The same box where everything I should have seen had been quietly piling up. That was how I'd nearly missed the hearing entirely. It was scheduled for the following Tuesday, 5 days away. I sat in my study that night with the folder Rosa had given me. Photographs of Harold Whitfield's obituary, Gerald Fitch's forged property transfer records, and forged signatures on documents I had supposedly signed. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I thought about calling the police immediately. I thought about confronting Diane right there and screaming until the walls shook. Instead, I did nothing for 1 full hour. I just sat there, staring at the photograph of Carol on my desk, wondering how I had let another woman erase her so completely from this house, from this life, in less than 2 years. The next morning, I met with an attorney to challenge Patricia's petition before the scheduled hearing. My attorney, a sharp woman named Elena Ortiz, filed an emergency objection that same day, asking the court to halt the proceedings while the fraud allegations were investigated. She also helped me file a police report against Patricia and Kyle Voss for suspected financial exploitation and forgery. After detectives reviewed Rosa's evidence, Scottsdale police came to my house that evening and placed her under arrest. Patricia, Diane, as I had known her, looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Not fear, not guilt, just calculation, like she was already planning her next move, her next widower, her next house on a quiet cul-de-sac somewhere in Arizona. She screamed at me as they walked her out, called me ungrateful, said I would have been alone and miserable without her, that she gave the last 2 years of my life meaning. I stood on my own porch and said nothing. What do you say to someone who spent nearly 2 years planning to steal your mind and your money while calling it love? Kyle Voss was arrested 3 days later, trying to board a flight to Reno with $62,000 in cash. The guardianship hearing never happened. Kyle took a plea deal first and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors, handing over records that gave them the evidence they needed. 8 months later, I sat through a different hearing in a courtroom that smelled like old carpet and coffee, watching Patricia Voss plead guilty to charges including financial exploitation and forgery. The judge sentenced her to 6 years. It felt hollow. 6 years wouldn't give Harold Whitfield's family their inheritance back. It wouldn't undo Gerald Fitch's decline in that memory care facility, where he still doesn't recognize his own children some days. I sold the house on Cactus Wren Lane last spring, using a different attorney, title company, and notary this time. All of them vetted personally by Karen before I signed a single page. I couldn't stand walking past that pool anymore. I live closer to Karen now, in a smaller place near Green Lake, Close enough that we have dinner together every week instead of trying to stay connected from more than 1,000 miles away. I still keep Carol's photograph on my desk, right next to a small stack of court documents I never throw away. My son Bradley calls every Sunday now, something that never happened before all of this. I wonder how many other Walters are out there right now, sitting across from a woman in a cream-colored blazer, believing they've found a second chance. At my daughter's insistence, I go to a support group now for seniors who've experienced financial abuse from a partner. Every single person in that room has a version of my story. A charming stranger, a convenient courtship, a folder they should have opened sooner. We sit in a circle every Wednesday and remind each other that loneliness is not a weakness, but it is a door, and some people know exactly how to walk through it. I don't regret loving Carol for 38 years. I regret how easily I let that love become a wound someone else knew how to reopen. If you've ever trusted someone new after losing someone you loved, and later wondered if the warning signs were there all along, you already understand exactly what I went through. Would you have confronted her that very night, or stayed quiet until the police arrived? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. It could be your father, it could be you.